What do you desire? What do you really desire? The deepest desires of your heart. Nietzsche said that we are what we eat. I don't think so. We are what we desire. Hi, this is Michael Shevack, and welcome to God Search. This is podcast 31. It is a momentous event for me. I'm absolutely committed to 90 of these to see where this thing goes. And I'm excited because I've just turned the corner on the first third, as we said way back on podcast number three. Three is a very powerful number for building. Building is based on threes on a tripod. It's nice and stable, and it doesn't get lost in the duality of twos. Twos are important too, but three is very, very stable. So here we are on podcast 31, and I think it's only appropriate that we begin with desire. Desire. We've done groundwork here up to now, but it's time to launch us skyward. And let's begin by reminding us of what we were talking about last time. Because I'm trying to make these things as sequential as possible so that when you're through with this, you'll actually have had some semblance of a course. You don't have to follow it linearly. You can go backwards and forwards as your skill and your sense of where the glossary is for this whole thing takes place. But I'm trying to keep it in as organized a fashion as possible. And last time we talked about a distinction which I think is critical. The distinction is between something which is perfect and something which is perfected. Now, my teacher, as I said last time, said to me and grilled it into me. He was a tough guy. And he said, Michael, perfection is a highly problematic concept. Highly problematic concept. Okay. I'm teaching my view, which is based upon his view, but not totally. I'm a different person. And I believe that everything in life, and I believe it because I experience it, is perfect. Perfect. Now, I don't believe that because someone wrote it in a book. I don't do that. I believe it because that is my experience that I call God, is that everything is perfect. What I mean by that is that because of the cause and effect, and the effect and the cause, and the causal nature of everything, where there is not anything that doesn't have a relationship to anything else. There is nothing that doesn't have a relationship to anything else and isn't involved in some kind of pre and post, before and after. All right. Because of that, that tissue, everything, once it is in existence, is already perfect. From the Latin, per facere. I don't know how to pronounce Latin, but in Italian, be per facere. It has been made, it has been fashioned, it has been turned into fact. Fact. Okay. That's what perfect means to me, is that it should be perfect. When in the Christian scripture it says, be thou perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That's what I think it means. It means to translate into everyday material life the deep meaning and secrets of spiritual existence. That's what it means to be perfect. And I hold that everything is already perfect in that sense. But it can be made more perfect. It can be perfected. It is perfect that we created a car that belches out carbon monoxide and destroys the air, meaning it is perfect. It is part of the causal relationship of our actions in relationship to the order of nature with the use of our supernatural abilities, commonly called technology. It's perfect. It is a fait accompli. It is a fact. It is a doing. Okay? It is a fashioning. It has been brought into the existence of reality. It's perfect. But hey, we can do a better job. we can take that which we bring into existence and we can improve our relationship to the design of this world and create an automobile which is kinder to ourselves and our environment, which are inseparable. We mistreat the environment, we'll get sick. If we mistreat ourselves, all reality will get sick as well because we're part of it. So, what is perfect in spiritual design needs to become perfected for human life. Perfected for human life. Now, we're going to go dig a little bit deeper now. We've talked over and over and over and over again about the whole notion of sowing and reaping, which is a beautiful metaphor that's common throughout the Hebrew Bible and through Christian scriptures about how to sow and reap, how to cause and effect. In mysticism, it's called ilavi ilul. It's what's before and after, and really master the gift of our will that allows us to impose our desire. There's the word, our desire upon reality and have an effect. I do that when I'm speaking into the camera. I do that. You see me doing that. Okay, I'm affecting the molecules, I'm affecting the subatomic structure of reality by my communicating to you. So I want to talk deeper about sowing and reaping because sowing and reaping is the foundation to your personal interaction with this experience we call God. It is how you as an individual and as you as an ego interface with it. Okay. Now, sowing and reaping is not just about desire. It is. We'll talk about that. But it's much more complex than just desire. Okay. Sowing and reaping is, it's animals do it. Ants will create formic acid. Okay, their bodies generate it and they release the formic acid, and birds will take the formic acid by putting ants in their nests to keep the bacteria down so that their little hatchlings are safer. There's a sowing and a reaping. Animal life, all life, in fact, is born to die, and they feed back to the earth the materials and the nutrients that are necessary to compost new life from that. That is a sowing and a reaping. Our death is, in fact, a sowing, and there is a result that comes from our death, which is a reaping and an intensification of life. Then, as we grow from a natural consciousness to a supra natural consciousness, such as the bird who's cherry picking little ants to put in the nest, and then we grow to human beings who have a supernatural consciousness where we can create something that only serves our own ego and has absolutely no value to anything else. Okay. I mean, they'll have to learn to adapt, but it's not for them, you know. Once we get to that level, you now have conscious sowing, human beings creating ideas, thoughts, visions. Well, these are all desires. It's a desire of our heart to be able to create a nice little box in our kitchen that is always cool. So there's always food ready and it doesn't spoil. We have that desire for readily available food. And that created the impetus behind creating, you know, uh, refrigerator, the climatization, something to keep it cool. right? That's a desire. And as we consciously plant these desires, and the more complex we are, the more complexity is built into the fulfillment of that desire. Okay. But at the core, whether it is an animal planting its bodily secretions like an ant, or all creatures, plants, and animals sowing their bodies upon death, or whether it is human conscious planting of its ideas and visions, all of which are complexities of desires, okay, oftentimes very simple at its most basic, survival and continuity of life. As we do that, we have to understand that there is a mysterious thing that is going on underneath, behind the scene, right? Just as we will take the seed of a plant, which is in sense a distillation of the plant, nicely coated and protected, so its tender little DNA is not going to be disturbed by the environment. And we take that little seed and we plant it in the ground of the earth and we cover it with earth and it begins to sprout. Just as we do that, we do the same thing in thought. We do the same thing in thought. The discovery by human beings that they could actually artificially farm seeds, that they didn't have to wait for the winds of the world to blow the seeds in a certain direction and then go hunt and harvest in order to collect it. The discovery that we could use our conceptual apparatus and supranatural ability so that we could work at a higher level, supranatural ability over the earth, so we could farm, was a great advance on the human being. But what was it? It was the discovery that you can take an intentional placing of a seed, put it into an opening in the ground of the earth, and that the nutrients and all the sustenance that is needed of all kinds, visible and sustenance which is invisible, would be applied to this seed, and from an acorn you would get an oak tree. These days we attribute it merely to DNA, but there's a lot more going on than just DNA. It's much more. It's DNA is a part of it, but DNA is inseparable from the chemistry of the entire universe. It's inseparable from the propulsive aspect of forces in general and the dynamism in a helix. It's a very complex notion. We can't just be very simple and say, oh, it's all due to DNA. Those are modern idolatries where we have a new discovery and we think everything is the new discovery. No, everything is not the new discovery. There's a lot more going on than meets the eye. What we have in that kind of agriculture, which is a very material agriculture, that would reduce us down to basics like Nietzsche, we are what we eat, okay? And there's some truth to that. We are what we eat. If we eat, garbage, we can turn our bodies into garbage. So there's a little truth to it, in its right framework. Beyond it, it's a very destructive concept. But we have to take a look beyond the material sowing and reaping when we are dealing with desires. Because oftentimes what we have with desire is a thought, it's a feeling, it's a kind of conceptualized urge that we have that's built into us. And this conceptualized urge is so very, very powerful. It oftentimes moves through us. It's not like we choose to do it. It oftentimes has its own impulse, and it's as if nature or a higher nature is taking us over for us to do its work. Desires are very interesting. We can have very conceptual desires, such as to build a computer or a car and that kind of stuff. But we can have subconscious desires. For instance, you might be a very primitive animal, primitive and dirty because you don't know how to clean yourself fully. As you're growing, you lose some of your instinctual ability to keep hygienic because you're shifting from one level of species to another level of species. And then what happens is subconsciously, a very strange miracle takes place, and some fat from an animal and some ash left over from a a burnt log, all right, mixes with some water and maybe a little lightning strikes, and bang, out of this comes this gloppy thing that is very funny. And when you smear it on yourself and it gets wet, you notice all the grease and all the gook goes off, and all of a sudden, subconsciously, nature produced something for you that you need called soap. Now, we know about saponification now, and we can do it consciously in the laboratory. But just imagine that that substance was created subconsciously for us at the very moment that we were expressing in very subtle feelings an ookiness and a desire to somehow be beyond it. And nature responded. The fact is that our desires are seeds. And instead of it being planted in the earth, covered up with a little soil and gaining its sustenance of all kind from the earth, it also goes into what's behind the earth and what's behind all things, which as you begin to go on your God search and as you begin to experience God, you begin to become aware that the ground that we stand on, so we can stand on ground that is standable, is what a lot of people call consciousness these days. We're doing that for a lot of reasons. It has a lot of influence from Eastern religions, but it's there to replace an earlier philosophical concept that got overused, called being. It's still used, but being became philosophized into being just this tabula rasa, this blank slate that is just so perfect and nothing can take place. And if you want to read someone decimate it, who does a great job of destroying that idea, read Alfred North Whitehead. He does a great job of decimating that idea. Consciousness is now what people are tending to talk about. Roger Penrose, God bless him, terrific mathematician, is now trying to work out with his partner on this, a mathematical structure to consciousness. So our desires are very much kind of little seeds that get planted in this ground of life awareness, which we are commonly calling consciousness. And it sets in forth a little active vibration, just as my voice is changing the molecular and the subatomic structure of what's behind my computer. And this is allowing you to eventually see me when it's put on the large wavelengths. This desire ability to plant our thoughts into a more subtle aspect of reality. It's not like we're planting it outside of reality. It's still planting, and it's still in a soil, and it's still being picked up, and it's still being given the nurturing and the sustenance for it to take place. But it's a more subtle level of reality. The earth is a grosser level of it, where we can actually see the little seed go in and little sprouts come up, and we can tend the seeds in the garden. It's a much more beautiful and much more concrete version of that. But desire is very much a seed that's planted in consciousness, and consciousness is very, very much the nutritive soil, the ground through which our desires take place. Now, the fact is, our desires are also consciousness, and they're more active. We might say they're more active, they're more branded with a particular direction to it. They're more earmarked for a specific goal in mind. So, but nonetheless, it is all consciousness, even the desires. Don't now make the other mistake of creating a mind crack where desires are here and being or consciousness is here. That mind crack becomes overly emphasized in certain extreme forms of mysticism, including certain extreme forms of Buddhism, and it paralyzes creativity because it creates a duality and a mind crack, and then you can't get out of it. Unfortunately, when that kind of extreme mind crack takes place, you get invaders of extremely materialistic cultures that throw you off mountains so that you have to rediscover materiality. Politics is very spiritual. Politics is extremely spiritual, but we have to look at it very, very carefully. Now, when we plant a seed, we're planting a more subtle seed in thinking. Okay. We can plant a seed if we have sexual intercourse. We can plant a seed when we put a seed in the ground or an acorn. And we can plant a seed when we have a feeling in us for a desire. We can shape it in a thought, which is a more dense form. We can express it in a word, which is, you know, a seminal idea, like semen is below. You have seminal ideas being given voice. You can, excuse the male bias, you can ejaculate the seed. You can ejaculate the seed, or from a more female and more, in a sense, more completed way, you can give birth to a metaphysical baby, just as you can give birth down below to a metaphysical baby. These are desires, okay? But they happen on different scales and they're very similar. A four-letter word for inseminating without love, just for sexual pleasure, begins with F and ends in K, okay? There is another four-letter word that ends in K that also means to inseminate and to have intercourse. It's called talk, which a little foreplay before the other thing wouldn't be too bad. Sometimes these days in birth control era, we put the horse before the cart, um, in a very strange way. So let's realize that in this ground of reality, of being, of consciousness, of living texture of desire, living beingness that is seeking to become more of itself and has is kind of scintillating little sparks of creativity and urges within it. Upon that, all of the impulses that drive our world and our reality take place. These days, we might call those desires quantum possibilities and use that kind of mathematical construct. And it's a perfectly nice way to describe it. It has weaknesses, but all theories do until they become perfected. But saying there's, an unfathomable number of quantum possibilities and even multiplicities of universes to express that, that's a nice way of saying that everything is desires. Desires upon desires upon desires upon desires. I have a desire, by the way. Please go to yourgodsearch.com and continue to strike up the conversation with me, and let's communicate more, and let's get out a really good, clean, sane, spiritual view of life that isn't red team or blue team or purple team or anything in between, something that's really useful for the advancement of all aspects of human life, which we're already doing while we are slowly unraveling the dynamism of covenant. Because desire is the kind of little engine on life, it's the engine on covenant. Desire is so incredibly important because desire is the rudimentary force behind everything. It is the rudimentary force. If you believe in a God, I'm not forcing you. You would believe that God had a desire to create a world before the world was created. Somehow there was an urge within God to be more than God could. This is a very mystical notion. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's false. But it is universally acknowledged that desire in some form is the most delicate and most primary force behind the creativity and the spark of life. Desire. Now, when you release your desire as a human being, well, you're not alone. You have what we have discussed briefly, species consciousness. And if you are part of the movement which is called history, which is the unification of all the nations of the world and all the peoples in the world into one beautiful system of life, which advances each and every individual and groups of people and families and communities and nations, including everyone on the planet. If you are a fan of Star Trek, which I am, um, if you're involved in history, your desires are not merely yours. Some people would say they're merely yours, but they are yours, and your desires will be yours, and you will get what you got, and you will put it in. Your desires will be unique to you. Okay. You'll just put out and put into consciousness your desires. Okay, they'll be yours, but they're not merely yours. They're going to intermingle and they're going to weave with the desires of other people, so that in historical consciousness and covenantal consciousness, which is historical, meaning we are trying to build through time and through generations a complete and whole framework for all human life on the planet, these desires intermingle. Now, sometimes because of that, your desires are much more complex than you yourself realize, because consciousness, when you seek to become one with it, when you wish to become part of a God experience, which includes truth and unity, not just for yourself but for others, the causal nature of God, which includes your ability to create as a supernatural creature, it alters that. So there are exquisite timings between when you receive your desire, meaning it becomes perfect, it is created, and when other people receive their desires and it becomes perfect. And that timing is commonly called these days synchronicity. Okay. People who are opening up spiritually through yoga and meditation are noticing the exquisiteness of these timings. And these timings they call synchronicity. This is very much happening spiritually because it was brought into Western thought in Einstein's special relativity. He based the whole thing on synchronicity. And as that became proven, synchronicity as a spiritual factor became part of our thinking, just as Newtonian physics took place, and the notion of a universe that's an ordered clock, took place. And even deism, which is that God created the world and left us alone, came out of that whole Newtonian structure. As we learn more, our views of life change. And as our views of life change, we get new philosophies and new ways of thinking. So the desires mingle. It's not just about getting our desires if you're going to have a God experience, which is covenantal. It's about having your desires individually. You are American. If you adhere to the fact that you have a right to individual conscience and identity, but it also has to be in tandem with other people, because we're creating something bigger than just one person. On the other hand, you can't take that something which is bigger and you can't blow it up into some kind of huge, gigantic governing body or state and then squash individuals and stamp them out as if they are exactly little Model Ts coming on Henry Ford's original assembly line. So you got to be careful. But the important thing in covenantal living is that you have to understand that your desires are not merely yours, they are yours. And because they are yours, it's important to do a good job with what your desires are. You might say that there are two basic criteria behind how illumined or enlightened or, awake, not to be confused with woke, awake a person is spiritually, which is what do they desire? I mean, what do they desire? Do they desire some, BDM kind of club? Do they desire, you know, um, an incredible, amazing penthouse in the sky with people serving them everything that they want? That's a good desire. I wouldn't mind that. Sounds like a lot of fun. Or do they also desire that there's peace on the earth and that people are fed and that all people are taken care of? Oh my God, they're communists. No, they're not communists. They're just nice people. But it can get to an extreme where you have a profanity called communism, and we have to be very, very careful about that. But who you are is very much what you desire. And the quality of your desires really teaches you a lot about the nature of who you are as a human being, much more than what you eat. You could say, well, you are what you eat, but what you eat is not just food, it's also your thoughts, it's your feelings. And what you eat is going to produce a desire that is not just yours, but shared by other people. So, what you desire is a big criterion for who you are. But there is also something else which is part of the mystery of the God experience. The more aligned you are to the living experience of God, even though your desires are mingling with the desires of other people, the more you are in alignment with that, the quicker your desires tend to become perfect, meaning the quicker they are born. It just works that way. And it should be obvious why. Because when your desires are harmonious with the desires of, let's say, all reality, with the desires of the earth, with the desires of other people, well, they're in alignment, and the force behind those desires is so much greater that if there's interference that's getting in the way, well, the force is so much stronger, it will neutralize or even break through the obstructions to your desires so that you can have those desires more readily and they come quicker. So there are two indications, roughly speaking, and this is not to create a contest by how awake a person is. What are their desires and how quick do their desires emerge? There are great mysteries on why certain desires are come into reality faster than others. The world may need it. For instance, the world may need to have a digital technology. Why? Because we are devouring all the trees on the planet. The oxygen is dropping, and replacing paper may be a wonderful thing that has to take place no differently than the invention of soap. Desires are very mysterious. They are outwardly material, they're inwardly thought or spiritual, but the inner and the outer, and the outer and the inner, as we said last time, they're both belly buttons and they both nourish. The desire that you have is the driving force, the urge. It is the push behind the search for God. All God's search is driven by a desire. Now, some may say that that's not true, that God is beyond desire, and this is a very mystical thing. And some people say that God is desireless. It's a very Buddhist proposition, and there's a goodly amount of truth to it if you frame it correctly. But I'm not going to teach that here because what we want on God Search is a living, breathing, material, um, joyful, human, utterly human experience of God. That's what we're looking for here. If you want something else, there are other teachers besides me. God bless them. We need different points of view. This is not at all a monolithic world. So it is important. We want to be aware of our desires. Our desires are our God search. Our desires are our God search. So therefore, my desire is to thank you for your desire, because without your desire, I never would have been moved to do God search. I mean, someone just kind of took me out for breakfast one day and said, "You're podcasting," and that's how it took place. It was in my mind subconsciously, and a lot of students had asked me to do it, but I was kind of birthed and pushed out in order to do it. So it's like soap being born. It was subconsciously being brought to me. Desires are very holy. They're very beautiful. It is how the world speaks to us and how we answer the world back. So thank you for your desire to be here for God Search. This is podcast 31, and I am Michael Shevack. Join me again next week, next Wednesday, about 7:40, no, 5:45 Eastern Daytime. And hey, if you're alive, life is already perfect. It is already brought into existence through a confluence of unimaginable causes and effects. You are already on a God search. If you are alive, you can't avoid a God search. A God search is everything. The only issue is, are you aware of it? So if you are aware of it, uncover God, discover God, and please put your religion that you were born with under a solid foundation that's spiritual and alive and isn't neurotic. And feel the gift of your ancestry and the gift that you were given by having been born in a certain spiritual tradition. Believe me, there's a gift there. And if you can't find the gift, there are other religions and other teachings out there that may be more suited to you. But don't give up your God search. God is astonishing, amazing. It is as simply reachable as the right desire, as the right desire. See you next time. Mike Shevack, God Search, yourgodsearch.com. Don't forget, go to yourgodsearch.com. God bless. Bye bye.